Years ago, I asked an employee for some honest feedback. I don't remember exactly how I asked. I remember his answer crystal clear. He told me I was too busy. He wasn't pointing at my workload, he was pointing at the way I showed up when someone was in front of me. I'd be in a conversation and also checking the screen, thinking about the next meeting, running two or three things at once through my head. Now, I thought I was being efficient. His experience was that half of me was somewhere else. That stung, mostly because I knew he was spot on right. I could explain it away. I had a lot going on. I was responsible for a lot. I was trying to keep everything moving. None of that mattered, and none of that changed his experience sitting across from me. He had my time. He did not always have my attention. So I worked on it. I got more deliberate about putting things down and looking at the person in front of me. I stayed in the conversation instead of running ahead at whatever came next. At least I thought I did. And that's the problem. How would I know? I can tell myself I've changed. I can believe I've changed. I can remember every bit of the work I put in. That is not the measurement. Earlier today, while I was working through this very idea, I asked my wife a question. I didn't give her any of this backstory. I just asked, what communication behavior have you seen me genuinely change over time? Her answer gave me the score, and I'm going to come back to what she said. I'm Dale Dixon, and this is the Presence Lab, where we work on communicating clearly when the pressure rises. This week, we're asking a question that sounds very simple. How do you know you've actually changed? Not that you learned something, not that you got more self-aware, and not that you read a book or had a really good Tuesday. No, changed. There's a real distance between wanting to behave differently and somebody else experiencing you differently. So we're going to build a simple scorecard for that. 3 tools: the retell, the replacement, and the outside score. By the end, you are going to have a way to measure communication change that's much harder to fool than your own good intentions. I've turned the whole framework into this week's field guide. It is free and it's waiting for you inside the Presence Lab community. So here's the deal. Most of us are generous graders when we're grading ourselves. That's a little different than I'm hard on myself when I make a mistake. We know our intentions. We remember the effort. We remember the meeting where we listened instead of jumping ahead. Then we quietly move our own grade from a C to an A minus. I understand that pull. I do it myself. It's also pretty weak evidence. So a few episodes back, we talked about the gap between what we mean to communicate and what the other person actually receives. Now, this is related and it's a different problem. The question here is, what counts as proof that the gap is closing? There are a lot of ways we hand ourselves credit. I've been working on that. I understand my trigger now. I'm way more aware of it. I took the feedback seriously. Now, all of that can be true. None of it tells us if our behavior has changed. It shows up everywhere in leadership. Someone tells us our meetings run one-sided. We decide to listen more. A month later, we feel like we're listening more. Are we? A leader hears they get sharp when they're challenged. They notice it. They might even apologize faster afterward. Did the behavior change? Someone learns they bury the decision under 15 minutes of setup. They start thinking about being concise. Did the meetings actually get shorter? We've been there. There's also an internal version of every one of those behaviors, and there's the version everyone else experiences. The second one belongs on the scorecard. And this matters most under pressure. When the conversation is easy, most of us can perform the new behavior. The test comes when we're rushed, we're challenged, frustrated, or just caught off guard. So, Here's what we're working on. Pressure narrows our attention and it pushes us toward the response we've practiced the most. So two things happen at once. The old behavior has home field advantage because it's the one we've run the most. And while that's happening, we're busy managing the moment, the deadline, the disagreement, the room, so we can't fully watch ourselves do it. That's why the honest score can't come from us. And there's useful research underneath this, and none of it needs the brain drawn as a computer with a flashing red light. Wanting to change and changing are two different events. Researchers Peter Gollwitzer and Pascal Sheeran studied what they call implementation intentions. And that's a technical name for a practical idea. Instead of saying, I'll listen better, we decide the situation and the behavior in advance. If this happens, then I'll do that. Across a large body of studies, those if-then plans raised the odds that a good intention actually became a behavior. That matters here because pressure removes choices. If the replacement is already decided, there's less to figure out in the moment. And there's a second body of research on multi-source feedback, what we usually call 360 feedback. The findings are humbling. Handing people feedback does not transform them. The changes in their ratings over time tend to be modest. Improvement gets more likely when the person accepts something needs to change, believes it's possible, sets a specific goal, and actually works the behavior. That sounds so obvious. Apparently, it took the field a few decades to confirm it. I'm glad somebody did. There's one more idea, and it comes from healthcare. It's called teach back. Clinicians learned that asking a patient, do you understand, is a weak way to find out. People are going to say yes. Sometimes they think they understand. Sometimes they're embarrassed to say they don't. Sometimes they just want out of the room. Teach back changes the question. The patient is asked to say the information back in their own words. One version, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality recommends, is basically, when you get home, what will you tell your partner about this visit? That question does something important. It tests the meaning. It shows us what the person built from the words, not just whether they heard them. This is healthcare research, not a leadership study. The principle is going to go with us anyway. If the message matters, close the loop. And here's the foundation for this episode. Intentions don't belong on the scorecard. Behavior does. A useful scorecard asks 3 questions. Can the other person explain the meaning accurately? Can we name the exact behavior we're trying to change? And can someone else see that change again and again? Meaning, behavior, evidence. That is the scorecard. So the first tool is the retell. We use it when a message matters enough that a misunderstanding would cost us. It's a role change, a strategic call, a hard performance conversation, maybe a shift in direction. Most of us end those conversations with, does that make sense? The other person is going to say yes, and then we move on. That's acknowledgement. It might also be understanding, maybe. We don't know yet. The retell gives us better evidence. Ask a question that forces the meaning into the other person's words. What are you going to tell your team about this? How would you explain this decision to your client? When you talk with your partner tonight, how will you describe what we decided? We're not asking them to recite our words. We're listening for the meaning they built from our conversation. That's audience first in a very practical form. I wrote about audience first and sweating bullets more than a decade ago, and the core has not moved. Communication is measured on the receiving end. The retell takes that one step further. It hands us the evidence while there's still time to fix the message. If their version is different from what we meant, we've learned something valuable. The meeting isn't over. We go around again with different words and a different example. Then we check again. That's a closed loop. That's meaning. Tool number 2 is the replacement. This one is about changing our own behavior under pressure. The mistake is setting a goal we can't score. I need to be more present. I need to be less reactive. I want more executive presence. Good aspirations. Try putting a check mark next to one after a hard meeting. What exactly are we checking? So the replacement takes the behavior we want gone and puts something we can see in its place. Years ago, my problem was multitasking during conversations. Be more present would have been a lousy training plan. A replacement behavior sounds more like this. When someone comes into my office to talk, the screen loses my attention and the person gets it. In other words, I check. Do I put this out of my reach, out of eyesight? I'm pointing to my phone for people listening to the podcast and not watching the video. So when someone challenges my position, I let them finish before I respond. When I get bad news, I ask one question before I give an opinion. When I feel myself speeding up in a talk, I finish the sentence and let the period land. Now, there is something to score. This is where the if-then research earns its keep. If the trigger shows up, then this is the behavior I want ready. And we've taken one decision out of the pressure moment, the exact moment attention narrows and reaches for the practiced response. I know what I'm practicing. I know what someone else should be able to see. I know what belongs on the scorecard. That is behavior. Tool number 3 is the outside score. This is the uncomfortable one, and it's the reason the first 2 matter so much. Remember what pressure does? We can't fully watch ourselves while we're managing the moment, so we get the evidence from the people who can. Pick a behavior, pick 2 or 3 people who experience that behavior often, ask them one specific question, then ask it again later. If the behavior is presence, over the past month when we talk, how often do you feel you have my full attention? If it's defensiveness, when you disagree with me, how easy is it to finish your point before I respond? If it's clarity, after I make a decision, how clear are you on what happens next? Keep the question behavioral. Keep it narrow. Then give the person real permission to answer it. A number helps. 1 to 5 is plenty. The useful part comes next. What have you seen that makes you give me that score? That's where the evidence lives. A 3 with a real example beats a 5 designed to make us feel good. Then we practice. 30 days later, we ask again. Same question, same behavior, ideally the same people that we asked the first time. We're looking for movement and we're looking for consistency. One good meeting is encouraging. One good meeting is still one good meeting. The behavior gets trustworthy when it survives different days, different rooms, and different levels of pressure. That's when the scorecard starts to move. That's evidence. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Dale, this sounds awfully formal. Am I supposed to poll my coworkers every 30 days? No. Please don't turn yourself into a walking engagement survey. Keep it small. One behavior, a couple of people, one question. Example, I O3 with employees every single week. All I have to do is bake this simple question into the O3 one-on-one conversation, and it makes it easy for me to check, almost at the subconscious level for them. The point is to get outside our own head long enough to collect real evidence. We know what we're trying to do. Everyone else only gets what we did. That difference is the whole reason for an outside score. One of my mentors reminds me, I judge myself on my intent. Others judge me on my impact. That's what this is all about. Which brings me back to the employee who told me half of me was there and half of me was somewhere else. Now that was years ago. I remember the sting more clearly than the setting. He handed me something I needed. I was doing too much at once, and the people in front of me got whatever attention was left over. So I worked on it, and I've kept working on it. And you know what? I still catch myself. The old behavior didn't just pack a suitcase and leave town. That's exactly why I wanted an outside score. So, earlier today, I asked Tanya, my wife, what communication behavior have you seen me genuinely change over time? I didn't tell her what I'd been working on. I didn't mention the employee. I didn't hand her a list of options. She thinks about it, and then she says, "You are more present." That's a better score than anything I could have given myself. Not because she thinks I've arrived. Trust me, she's holding plenty of additional material. It's better because I didn't tell her what I wanted to hear. She named the behavior years later in a completely different relationship. She's also the person who has watched me the longest. The people closest to us keep the longest record of who we actually are. That is evidence. So, here is your move this week. Pick one behavior, not 5, just one. Name the trigger, and then name the replacement. Then find someone who experiences you often enough to know the difference and ask for the outside score. The field guide for this episode gives you the 3 tools, the sample questions, and a simple 30-day scorecard. It's free. Go grab a hold of it. Details in the description of this episode. It means so much if you like, subscribe, and share this episode. Even better, come find us inside the free Presence Lab community. It's where I hang out, it's where the field guides live, and it's where we work this stuff through together. The link is in the show notes. Because at some point, all the assessments, the intentions, the insight, and the practice have to answer one question. Can the people around me see the difference? Intentions don't belong on the scorecard. Behavior does. The scorecard belongs to the people who experience you. I'm Dale Dixon. This is the Presence Lab. Let's go practice.